and it costs like $40,000 per guide dog to train. Or you can donate approximately $25 to a charity that gets resources to people in Africa that will either prevent them from going blind or reverse their blindness. Clearly, the charity that prevents blindness is like way more effective. It's way better to give to that charity.
Like if you put a trolley problem and you have 100 Nobel laureates on one side of the trolley and my daughter on the other, I'm saving my daughter 100 times out of 100. Like, it's not even a tough call. Like, I wouldn't even think about it very much.
You can say maybe it's more unoptical for someone to say, to have to admit to being un-American, that like rhetorically it could be good. But if all you mean by American moral prospect is simply this view of metaethics, then anyone who has a view of metaethics that would not allow, you know, the Christian nationalists to do what they want could say the exact same thing. It's just
No.
Liking and subscribing helps me continue to produce content, and it's greatly appreciated. You can also make sure to catch these debates live, either here on YouTube or in the description. There are links to my Twitch, my Kick, and my Twitter.
If you look at the way most people who align on the left think about morality, they subscribe to this idea that it's very Kantian. Like, what matters is your intention. That's how you know you're being moral. So doing something that's good for somebody that you don't know is even better than doing something that's good for someone you love, because you've divorced your self-interest from it, right? Like, if I help my friend, I make my life better in the process. And so I'm kind of being selfish on some level. But if I help a stranger, if I help somebody from a country I've never even heard of, that's truly selfless, right? That's truly moral. And the flip side of that is kind of the more like traditional Christian morality that the right tends to have, which is that like, it's like enlightened self-interest. Like I should help people in my community. I should help my family. I should help my friends. And I should be more interested in helping people around me, because when I help the people around me, it makes my life better. It makes my family stronger. It makes my community better. It is not like, it's not divorced from self-interest. It's in fact an extension of my self-interest to build communities that are better and will make the world a better place. And I think that that's the fight that we're having right now. Like, I don't know if you saw. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if that's actually if that's the difference that's motivating things here. I think, like, I don't know that the left is motivated to help people outside of America because there's some greater virtue in helping someone that you don't know because you're not benefiting in some personal way. I think it is, frankly, much more about a sort of like neo-Marxist, even if they wouldn't call it that, view of the world of like, we because of the privilege that we have to live in the richest nation in the world, it is therefore our like moral responsibility to take care of the people who are less fortunate. And it's more appealing to take care of the brown people who are less fortunate because brown people are also oppressed than to take care of the white people in your own country who are, you know, who are struggling. And so I think it's maybe what I'm saying is less charitable, but I think it's more accurate. I don't think people are on the left are motivated. I just think it's like, it's much more about like virtue signaling privilege and stuff like that. Frankly, I don't know that it's just about like that it's somehow like morally superior to help someone that it won't know your name or whatever. That's almost like, I think, too righteous. I don't really think that's actually what's motivating the split between left and right.
Yeah, but but that's why it's virtue signaling. Right, like the what makes it a virtue signal is that it's a irrational belief, right? Like you can show like, I'm so well off that I can spend my resources to help people in a way that will never help me, and I can still do it, right? Like it's you know, God, what's the name? What's Rob Henderson? It's God, I'm blanking. What was the name of this again? It's a
luxury belief.
Oh, it's a luxury belief. Oh shit, we got like a panel of 6 right now. Look at this. We got everybody here.
Like maybe there are some left-leaning people who aren't doing it for this reason, but like we recognize that, you know, just generally my utilitarian, no special obligations, you know, aside, like charities that help people in the third world tend to be like way more effective than charities that help in people in the first world, right? Like it costs, like, for example, this is just one striking example. Like you can pay to fund getting someone a guide dog in the US, like training a guide dog, and it costs like $40,000 per guide dog to train. Or you can donate approximately $25 to a charity that gets resources to people in Africa that will either prevent them from going blind or reverse their blindness. Clearly, the charity that prevents blindness is like way more effective, and it's way better to give to that charity, even if we weigh special obligations to some extent.
Well, it
You are so he's so right, because he's making an argument against regulations so that we can actually do charity work in America. Thank you, Nonfon.
No,
glad you're on the deregulation path like me. Woo!
I mean, I'm not a big fan of regulation, but
yeah, I think I think what I was saying earlier, Nonfon, is that it depends on the frame. Like, if you're talking about like what is going to produce the most utility, I would tend to agree with you. You're going to get more bang for your buck in the third world because aid is cheaper and tends to have a bigger effect as a result. So I think you're right about that. Another way of looking at it is it's like, well, isn't the human instinct to make my neighborhood better? Isn't the human instinct to make, my family better, my community better, to spend my time making the world around me a better place and leaving it better than I found it? And isn't that kind of, let's call it enlightened self-interest, which is kind of another guiding principle that one could have for how to spend their time and their charity and their resources. And I think those are just fundamentally different ways of looking at the world. Right. Like, I don't know that
kind of,
I wouldn't disagree with you about impact, but I'm not sure that impact is the only thing that needs to be weighted.
Right. But I'm just saying, like, clearly. So for one, I think like there was very clearly like a rational reason for helping people out in the third world. Right. Like, it's not just like simply I'm going to virtue signal about how selfless I am, or I'm going to rectify my whiteness in neo-colonialism or whatever. There's a very clear rational argument for giving to people in the third world over, people in America or other first world countries to some extent.
For autists, like moderate liberals like yourselves, yes. And that's where like effective altruism comes from. But even effective altruism had a lot of people on the left angry with that sort of like cold calculation. So there is a rational argument to be made, certainly. But I don't know, like, even I don't think that that's actually where I don't know that that's the motivating reason. And I could be wrong for what I think is motivating people. Maybe it's much more rational pragmatism and less virtue signaling. But I don't think most people are thinking, well, my $25 is going to go further if I send it, to the charity in Africa or whatever. I think they're just they're more emotionally vulnerable to the messaging or something, perhaps, or I don't know.
Well, is there a distinction, though, between the scenario Nonfon is talking about, where you're given $25 to charity and you're deciding, am I sending it to Somalia or am I sending it to Brooklyn? And, like he's making the point that in Somalia, the dollar will go further, which I think is a fair point to make, versus something like what happened in New York a few years ago, where we had a migrant hotel they were all full. So they kicked the kids out of a school and then started having migrants stay in the school. And the kids had to go to remote learning for a couple weeks. And the question is like, are you willing to reduce the quality of your children's education for X period of time to benefit people who are migrating in? Where all of a sudden it's not a question of like, I have this money that I could spend or lose. It doesn't have its value to me is not that high, but it could have a big impact elsewhere. Now you're saying like, no, I'm really good. Am I willing to inconvenience and hurt the education of my own children for this value? In which case the virtue signaling argument feels a little bit stronger.
Well, I think initially I just wanted to provide a rational justification for why people do this, and now maybe I just hang out with too many effective altruists, and they're the reason that I think more people are doing this or making that calculation than they are. If you want, so like for that example, though, I mean, for one, like you could definitely make the argument it's not clear even under a purely utilitarian view. It's that actually wouldn't be utility maximizing. Like it could be the case that the discontent sowed in citizens by their own governments, prioritizing foreign citizens. That's just like generally something that's going to actually cause more harm in the long run than benefits, even if we are weighing the benefits to the immigrants as well. Secondly, I think like clearly.
But even put aside the discontent of the citizens, what if it was going to come at a cost of like the educational consistency, right, for those children? So those children will be 1% less prepared, even just 1% less prepared, for the next year in school than they would have been had their schooling not been interrupted.
Well, so what exactly is the question there? Like, would I? If we're just like presupposing that doing this action would maximize expected value, like I would hold that would be like the best thing to do. Now, I gave the example. One is our clear to curb the maximize expected value. Yeah, so I'll get to that, but I also think that you can place thresholds on what an obligation might be. So clearly, someone may have an obligation. It would be immoral not to pick a drowning child out of a pool next to them. But, if there was a child 200 meters out of the ocean and you weren't a very confident swimmer, even though it might be morally virtuous to attempt to save that child or whatever, it might not necessarily be immoral to not do it. It might not necessarily have an obligation. But so I think those two things can address both people's like real world concerns or whatever. If we're to talk it like more fundamentally, whatever. I mean, I think essentially, I think insofar as you provide, special obligations, I think typically because in the real world, these types of special obligations serve good purposes most of the time. It is good for parents to generally prioritize their children in life. I would say we kind of overfit the intuition that we have that these things are good. We confuse the intuition that we have in the real world that like, it's good to do this thing with an intuition that it's like fundamentally morally valuable. Additionally, I think you're going to be subject to what are called each we dilemmas, which is just essentially, it's kind of like each we followed whatever rule you could leave scenarios where everyone is worse off. Like if two parents, if you imagine like a prisoner's dilemma style scenario where like two parents can either choose between benefiting their child a small amount or benefiting someone else's child a larger amount. If you say we have some special obligation to prioritize your own child, and presume they can't communicate to each other, right? Both parents would choose to prioritize their own child, and both children would be worse off than if both parents prioritized, the other person's child because it did more good. I also think you should consider what you would want under a veil of ignorance. Like if I was told I'm going to be stuffed into a suitcase and just going to be assigned a random one of these people or whatever, I'd want to do what maximizes the sort of expected value, but what maximizes my chance of living a good life. And if we just suppose it is the case that giving these immigrants education or whatever makes everyone better off, from that veil of ignorance, I would want to give the immigrants education. And for another way of thinking about that is you'd imagine essentially what it would be like to live as a collective entity, right? Like if you just had to live absolutely
Nonfon, man, I gotta stop you. I think this is exactly. I'm sure we should have a formal debate sometime, but
this is why nobody votes for the left.
A lot of the
problems that listening to utilitarians like annihilate
in a nutshell, right there, where it's like utilitarianism might be a moral system for a species that we are not, like a collective organism that you were kind of warming up to there. But it assumes that humans don't have a nature, which is like one of the weird things about it, right? Where you say I'm going to be honest with you. Like if you put a trolley problem and you have 100 Nobel laureates on one side of the trolley and my daughter on the other, I'm saving my daughter 100 times out of 100. Like it's not even a tough call. Like I wouldn't even think about it very much.
Wait, but also
every day, scientists.
Wait, but if there's 100 Nobel laureates, if there's 100 Nobel laureates on one track and I don't know if this is fucked up. Well, and 1,000 or 10,000, like random farmers from somewhere else in the world that I don't care very much about, I'm saving the Nobel laureate.
Yeah, no. There's a million ways you can do a trolley problem. The point I was making is that
no, of course,
humans are the kind of creature that cares more about the people we know than the people we don't know. We care more about our family than people who aren't in our family. We care more about our community and our country than people who aren't and I don't think that that's wrong. I don't think it's like a a human failing that we should be erasing through
No, it's right.
mathematical precision.
In fact, it's right.
It is
right.
correct. Yes.
Well,
It is
but I think
correct for psychological reasons and for like for tangible practical reasons, right? We need to care more about our sphere of influence, right? Because otherwise we are able to impact so little, and the psychological burden of worrying so much about things that you cannot control is extremely deleterious to an individual's well-being. And so it is correct to care more about the things that you can directly influence.
And that's what I heard Pence saying. You know, like, and maybe I'm being hyper charitable, but that's
no, I totally.
That's what I heard.
So
was Pence saying like, why, like, we should care more about, you know, the people in our country and our communities, and that should, like, our immigration policy should reflect us wanting to make our country better first and foremost, and then you can have a debate about what accomplishes that goal. Is it more? Is it less? Is it a specific country? Is it H-1B1s? Like, there's a million ways you could, like, get into policy from there. But from the first principle, that's what I heard. That's saying, like, we should be focusing on our country. Whereas Nonfon, I think, from a utilitarian perspective, that would not be the.
But I'm simply saying, like, I agree, humans have a nature and we have moral intuitions. I'm simply saying in some cases we kind of overfit intuitions because certain things that are good in the real world, and a lot you guys just gave, like Tolly just gave, reasons why instrumentally it is good that we care about our community and our family more. And I think most of the time in the real world, it is true that it is good that we care about our family and people around us more. We confuse that for something of intrinsic importance. And I think the examples I gave are things that make it more intuitive, that it kind of isn't the case that it is intrinsically important. If I, again, under the veil of ignorance, if I were to tell you you're going to be a random person, you'd want to do the thing that maximizes expected value. Or if I were to tell you that you were going to be a collective entity that eventually had to at one point live everyone's lives, you'd also want, the thing that created the best lives for everyone.
And in defense of Nonfon, he's making the argument, Ryan, that you were kind of making earlier when we were having this conversation about Christian nationalism and the Jews and the deists being at the will, essentially, of the Christians, right? With the veil of ignorance, or being someone who does not fall into that category explicitly, right? Yes, you want the society that's going to best maximize all the people. If you don't know if you're going to turn out to be, a Christian, a Jew, a deist, a Hindu, or whatever, you want the society that we want an American society, right? That maximizes freedom for all of us. Mm-hmm. So I understand the framework that Nonfon is working from. I think we all do. But.
Yeah, I
understand these two things. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, James.
I was just going to say, if these two things eventually do become disconnected, if we do eventually go too far in favor, sorry, I'm very sick still. But if we eventually get to the point where we are caring too much about our own over the needs of a kind of a global or a moral whole, I think that would be great. I think holding that framework at the moment is to be gross and hyperbolic, is a little bit like a Nazi guard in the aftermath of Auschwitz and saying, well, it would be bad if they controlled all the banks, right? It's like, well, I could agree in theory, but like this Auschwitz is not the place to make this argument.
Yeah, I think that
I'm so sorry, James. Your voice is like a video game character, and your hair is like Fabio. I'm distracted.
Thank you.
That's a great series of compliments. Yeah, I mean, I think that like it'll be interesting, Nonfon, when you and I actually have like a real debate on this stuff, because like just to give you the countervailing position, like I subscribe to Scottish common sense moral realism. So like the actual idea is that our moral intuitions are correct and should not be discounted. Like that there is like, they're not always perfect, but that there's a truth there that should not be casually discarded, and that we actually do have a sense of what's best, and that functioning that way is the right way to go about things in the world. And I think one of the dangers in ignoring those intuitions is that like one thing I'd say about utilitarianism is like, utilitarianism is a system that an omniscient God might use to calculate morality. It just doesn't seem to fit men particularly well. because we can't do the calculations and we don't know the answers. So everything's going to boil down to the weights we give things and how we measure and how we choose to ascribe value and weight value, which is all going to end up boiling down to our preferences and intuitions anyway. So it might be better just to be honest about what those intuitions are. And I think the risk is that you end up doing counterintuitive things for the sake of being counterintuitive. The best possible example, and I love you, brother, and I'm not trying to reignite the fight, but the best possible example being the Shrimp Welfare Project, where it's like, it's just, just glorying in the counterintuitive nature of saying like, holy shit, wouldn't it be better if I could save 10,000 shrimp from pain instead of my kid? And it's like, I don't know, man. I think that maybe human intuition might be 1 and shrimp welfare might be 0. It seems better to save my kid than the 10,000 shrimp.
Right. I mean, and I do think our moral intuition matters. I just think that we obviously there are evolutionary, explanations for many of our intuitions, cultural explanations for many of them, and those can give you reasons to discount your intuitions. And you should weigh your sort of fundamental deep intuitions against the intuition in any like specific hypothetical or whatever. Like because I think more fundamentally, I do have an intuition that like human happiness matters. Positive qualia matters, right? So if there's an example where it's unintuitive, where doing a thing that maximizes positive experiences, that feels wrong or whatever, I still have to weigh that against my more deep fundamental intuition that that just seems like a really important thing to maximize.
That's what people don't do generally.
Question for everyone, actually.
Go ahead.
It's I posted it in the chat as well, and it's what I've been like told that is a good like question to see if someone's like conservative or if they're like liberal, which is the first one is, are some people better than others? Nonfon, James, are some people better than others?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Ryan, are some people better than others?
Well,
Morally, actually,
I need to know what you mean better.
Yeah.
Oh, the lawyers, get out of here. Okay, Tally.
No, that's so important. Are you kidding me? If you ask me that question at church,
get out of here. Get out of here.
No, you ask me that at a basketball game. You ask me that at an NBA game.
Real quick, we'll ignore the lawyers for now. Tally, ask you.
Yeah.
What's your intuition?
We just fucking ruin everything.
No, I'm struggling too. I want to ask you for the same follow up, but I'm inclined to say
so the answer
yes.
Okay.
I'm inclined to say yes.
Wait, there's an answer.
Before we get into specifics, the answer really is that liberals will ask for more information. Conservatives will just say
hilarious. Yes. That is hilarious.
Interesting.
Quintuple, you just got added as a liberal. I'm so sorry, you got to take the Trump pants down, sign down. So James Nonfon and Tally are the conservatives off of this.
Yeah,
my left.
There's the second question though. You might be able to back yourself up here, Pentuple, which is: are humans inherently evil or sinful or bad? Are humans inherently evil, sinful, or bad?
Yeah, we are. We're all fallen.
I
That's my religious belief. Like what?
It's too vague.
You just asking me if I'm a Christian, right?
Yeah, that is basically asking if you're a Christian.
Yeah.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's infallible. So
this was told to me by a Christian, so that does track. Yeah.
So what's the follow up to that one?
The one is conservatives are going to say, well, yes. The liberals are going to be like, well, I think people are just they have their dad's mean to them, or they have some biases in their life that they like take a wrong path, and they can be like rehabilitated, and they have like that like bleeding heart kind of thing. So they would say that like humans aren't inherently bad, that we are inherently good, and that we are virtuous and altruistic, and we like wish the best for others, and that's how we have hospitals and other things.
Druid, you just missed the chance to do the funniest thing ever because only Pentuple answered. So you could have just said that, oh yeah, all the liberals say what Pentuple just said. 2 in a row. 2 out of 2.
Interesting.
Take down your MAGA HQ sign, Pentuple.
Hell no.
Druid's an honest interlocutor.
You won't fool me.
Yeah. So yeah.
I still don't buy the first one. Like anyone who isn't thinking about it wouldn't ask for a follow up to what better means, because like you could either explanation. I was ready to agree with you whether you said of course they are, of course they aren't. I was going to be like, of course they're better at basketball or singing or math or anything. Like humans are better and worse at everything.
That was the when Michael called in after the debate with Pisco and Nonfon and tried to get me. That was his question. Where he's like, if you believe all men are created equal, then like why are there any disparities? And it's like, well, because better and created equal have you can mean some different things by that terminology. Like I'm not, when I say all men are created equal, I don't mean that the average height between Southeast Asians and Nordics is the same. Like that's not that's not the point I'm making.
Is that like all human life matters, no matter how small or how quote unquote insignificant we might measure it. However we might measure it, whether that's by wealth, happiness, longevity, like whether or not someone was living on a farm or living in a city, however you want to measure that life. There's like a couple of stories that kind of like, and I think somebody said it where like you live every human life. Nonfon, did you say that?
Yeah, if you live as
it's like an egg theory.
Have you read
the story for that?
Exactly. Yep. There's an old story for that. But
you become a god at the end when you live the last one, right?
I think that's the last question, yeah.
If the moral basis for legal consideration of everybody as like a moral individual worthy of respect and consideration, how can that possibly be if I am so much more stupid than my debate opponent?
Maybe they huck really good hay bales, bro. Yeah. Like, but maybe they huck really good hay bales. Maybe they're a great taxi driver, but like they just can't think very well,
And on that subject, Nonfon, the other thing that we could either debate or discuss, I don't know what you want to do. I know we should schedule the utilitarianism one. I thought you actually, in the debate with Pisco, had the better line of argument. Pisco talked a lot, but the argument you were trying to make, which was, how do we know that, as long I'm putting words in your mouth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like epistemologically, how do we know that equity is counter to the idea that all men are created equal individual rights, rather than being an extension and compatible? That actually seemed like the much richer critique of the position I was taking. So that would be another interesting conversation to have if you wanted to have that at some point.
Maybe. I don't know. Listen, all due respect, American moral proposition just seems like, it's just a term that I don't believe should have like a single set definition that's worth continually arguing about. Like I don't know, but.
Well,
I thought that was
for the record, that's so helpful, because that's the concession I was trying to get. That would show how that the left has abandoned it. So that's incredibly helpful. I appreciate it.
I think you could categorize most of the left as. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Del.
I was just going to say, that was like the weakest part, I thought, of Pisco's argument in that debate, was that he was basically saying no one essentially the phrase the American moral proposition is not very popular. Most people don't immediately know what you're referencing, and so therefore it's not worthwhile to discuss it. And that seemed like a pretty terrible argument, because Ryan can clearly point to, right, and define, and they did point to it in founding documents of what they're talking about. And then, like Ryan said, it's like he's saying this is what needs to be adhered to. And if can we get an agreement about the content, if not the name of what we're talking about? It felt like that was a lot of what Pisco was doing, and maybe what you just did, although maybe you're saying the concept is not worth discussing either.
I'm just saying, like, the term is not to me at least, not meaningful enough to like discuss endlessly. I don't know.
But the term or the concept?
No, it's the test. It's the presence of a moral test that cuts away this word-based shell game that people like to play. And I think when I started watching Ryan was bemoaning, and I appreciate him for it, because it's so frustrating to talk with leftists, even other leftists in general, about this. They despise the presence of moral tests because it lets you clear away, because otherwise you can just pitch a utilitarian framework, an equity-based framework, a social justice framework, a Christian framework as being the ultimate moral good, really at any cost to you, because you never have to acknowledge the cost to other people. So if I say, let's give up, we should pursue equity instead, we should pursue equality of opportunity and equality of outcome instead, then I never have to engage with you, the other moral actor on the screen at any point. I can just pitch it and the consequences to you be damned. But what's good for you and me is good, like with a capital G. But if you ignore the moral test, then you can be immoral.
It seems to me, I guess, and whether the phrase is useful is another question. I know Joel Berry on X, he uses American creed instead of American moral proposition, which is a little bit more colloquial. That I'm fine with that. But I guess the question is, like, how do you function as a country of 300 plus million, almost 400 million, without a shared moral framework? Like, because if the goal of the country, as I've understood, is that we want to extend liberty, the amount of liberty you can extend a population is proportional to the morality of that population. Because if you give people liberty and they're going to use it to be highly immoral, you're going to end up having to restrict liberty because they're doing so many things that you don't want them to do. So I guess, on some level, that's the concern, if that makes sense from my side.
Sure. And I think it's, I don't disagree with the more fundamental or the point there that, like, it's important for a nation to have some, shared beliefs, some, about morality. But, I don't think, is going to I don't want to reignite this whole ass argument. Okay. But so, like, for example, when Gen Z, did his Googling moment or whatever, where he showed it was a term or whatever, the context of that was, like, earlier in the debate, he had said that, like, we had God-given inalienable rights, and that was something like fundamental to the American moral proposition. And me and Pisco, I think, were challenging that this term, as commonly, to the extent it is commonly understood at all, like, it is not so narrow as to only include God-given rights that are intrinsic and that are found, in the Declaration of Independence. When he searched it, whatever, like, you can go back and watch it. It doesn't just say inalienable God-given rights that are intrinsic and are, natural law that are listed in the Declaration of Independence. It does. Explanations he gives, does mention the Declaration of Independence, but also mentions other things within it. And that was, like, one of my, and I just, to some extent, Pisco points out the debate too. It's like the claim that, like, American moral proposition, requires a belief in some type of inalienable rights, and for Gen Z, even some belief in a deity. Like, it seems like, that requires a buy-in to a meta-ethical framework that most Americans could not even describe, let alone believe in. So,
well, they describe and believe are two different things.
Much less act upon.
Well,
they can act in a way that they ought to respect my personal space, my personal freedom. Mm-hmm. I don't need somebody to be able to give me I don't need somebody to be able to write Stefan Molyneux's a universally preferable behavior in order to justify why they don't steal my pen or my wallet. No, I can just, if I observe them not doing it and they react negatively to doing it, then that actually is sufficient.
Yeah, like any plausible ethical theory, I think, can say the same thing, though, because, like, any plausible ethical theory is going to hold that currently most people act generally morally, like, most of the time. Like,
well, but not like the difference actually does matter, right? Because, like, if you watched, like, I don't know if you watched Connor's debates with Jim Bob and Andrew Wilson recently, but Jim Bob took the Christian nationalist line where he said, like, well, what we want to do is organize a group of Christian voters who will eventually get so much power that we can legally amend the Constitution. And when we legally amend the Constitution, we can take away First Amendment rights and we can change X, Y, and Z thing. And we'll do it legally by amending the Constitution because of in line with our Christian morality, right? And the question then becomes like, well, why shouldn't we do that if we can? And, one answer might be because you have certain unalienable rights and you ought not take away unalienable rights, because even if you have the political power to do it, you shouldn't do it because they are unalienable. And therefore, it is wrong to do what you're suggesting. But absent that belief, and I think that belief is core to the country. It's written down in our founding documents. It's not like it's a historically up for debate. It's certainly something that was a common belief amongst our founders. That's why they wrote it down. I don't know what the answer to that question would be. Like, why ought they not do it? Is the answer because it's gonna minimize utility, and then they're going to say, well, I'm not a utilitarian, I don't care. Like if we don't share a moral
say they're not the
framework,
natural rights here, so they don't care, right? You can use like any other ethical framework from like a Christian nationalist framework to justify not wanting to be a Christian nationalist, right? Someone who's Muslim could easily say, I adhere to the divine command set out in the Quran, and this is not in accordance with that. Therefore, you should not do it, right? Just as I can say it doesn't maximize expected value.
No, I don't think you can, actually. I think all those beliefs and all those religions do actually have their own moral tests.
Yeah. What I'm saying is, under my framework, if they say that, I can say, because you are violating an core American moral philosophy. What you are suggesting is un-American if taken to the extreme that I'm positing here. I actually don't know that they all believe that, but if you imagine someone who took that position, and that's a tricky one because now they have to argue against American philosophy in favor of Christian philosophy. If you're going to say you shouldn't do it because it's contrary to Islamic belief, or you shouldn't do it because it's contrary to utilitarianism, why would they care?
But why would they care if it's anti-American or whatever, right? Like if they're already because American moral proposition or proposition to you just means the metaethical framework that you hold. Like it's the same. No, it's the same. It's the same thing.
Wait,
maybe it's more.
Hold on.
Maybe it's more on optical to say something that's anti-American, but it's equally that like if they're seemingly already taking the anti-natural rights framework for that, right? Like.
But the American moral proposition and Christianity hold so much in common. That's the point. Like one is sourced from the other. Similarly, Christian nationalism, and so you can make an appeal to somebody else's moral test that they share in common with the American moral proposition, at the very least.
If you're
Christian, you don't think that was a huge straw man of Ryan's position? Ryan is not saying the moral.
Ryan believes that the American moral prospect it includes at least a belief in inalienable rights that are discoverable through natural law, and or granted to us by some deity. And insofar as you stray from that, that is moving further away from the American moral prospect.
Sure, but that essentially his agreement or his belief in natural rights are incidental to that, because he is literally pointing back to the founding documents of the nation, which I think is the point that we're trying to pull it back to. And I think what James just said is so a Muslim might say that whatever that is not in line with their Muslim belief. Okay, it's not a Muslim nation. This is the American nation, right? This is America, and we're talking about the foundations of this nation. It just is written down, and it sounds like. I guess I don't even entirely understand. Is your argument that that's not that essentially it's wrong, that the founders had it wrong, and that is not the way that we should frame the moral basis of our country? Like what? Because again, it's not just Ryan's opinions, right? If they're pointing to these inalienable rights, right? These are the words that our founders painstakingly came to after several revisions, right? That had more and less of a focus on God and what that God looked like and a creator. So are you asserting that they were wrong, essentially, that it's outdated in some way?
Well, like technically, like I think they were wrong insofar as like I am just not a natural rights theorist, right? So like I don't agree with the founders there. I don't necessarily because I don't think the American moral prospect is sort of only that basis. I don't believe that we have to redefine, our entire moral prospect or our entire nation. I'm simply saying, like Ryan is stating that he gets to say when he talks to Andrew Wilson, you can't do this because it is un-American. It is against the American moral prospect. You can say maybe it's more unoptical for someone to have to admit to being un-American, that rhetorically it could be good. But if all you mean by American moral prospect is simply this view of metaethics, then anyone who has a view of metaethics that would not allow, the Christian nationalists to do what they want could say the exact same thing. It's
it's not a view.
No.
It's a bedrock that these two foundations share in common.
It might be helpful. What I'm saying is we've been playing a game of chess for 250 years, and chess has rules, right? There's moral, philosophical rules that have guided the country, right? And at a certain point, because we've agreed on these moral principles, when somebody just knocks over the chessboard or says queens can take out a machine gun and mow down the other pieces, you can then say that's an illegal chess move. Whatever you're doing is not within the rules of chess. It's not within the same framework. You are advocating for something completely different. You are abandoning the rules of chess. So when I say that this is the American moral proposition, I'm saying that this is the philosophy we were founded on. This is the philosophy that our founders used to make moral progress. It's the philosophy that Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass expressly invoked to make moral progress. And until very recently, it was the agreed upon philosophy. It was what we were about. As we depart from that, the question then becomes, well, people just get to replace it on their own. And what I'm saying is that I can then suggest that certain replacements are illegal chess moves. You are departing from the American moral philosophy because you think it's wrong or you think your philosophy is better. But that at least gives me a basis to say that what you're doing or what you're suggesting is in fact un-American.
To me, that seems trivial. You're saying it's an illegal chess move, but that seems like it just reduces to it's against natural law, which again, it's going to be against any other view than the Christian nationalist view.
No, if I'm arguing with a Christian nationalist, he and I are sitting down at the chessboard. It is a utilitarian. It is a leftist. Generally speaking, is a leftist framework that I have to debate this back and forth with. But I can sit down with somebody like Andrew Wilson, despicable as I think he is and disgusting as he is, and I can still make arguments back and forth because our moral foundations are both on top of the shared bedrock. I should have just said we have shared moral foundations for something like national.
Christians believe in natural law, by and large.
So you could disregard that as these are merely procedural, but Andrew Wilson and I and Ryan and I all agree that merely procedural is actually a pretty big deal. It's only the people who don't think of merely procedure as being a big deal that we need to contend with, or I would recommend not contend with, but it's not an argument we have to have among ourselves.
I don't want to take away from the let's call that a sneak preview of Nonfon and me having a formal debate at some point. I'm realizing it's 1 a.m. and I have work tomorrow. I'm being hugely irresponsible. But let's go around, maybe go Druid, Tally, James, Nonfon. What are you up to? Where can people find you? And anything cool happening in your life that you want to promote?
Thank you for watching. And if you want to help me continue to make content, liking, subscribing, and commenting are all greatly appreciated. You can also make sure to check out my Twitch, my Kick, and my Twitter down below, or consider becoming a member to my YouTube channel, which really helps support me as well.